Reborn. Again. The first thing I did wasn't cry. It wasn't pray. It wasn't run to him like I had before. The first thing I did was tear the engagement papers in half and decide, with a calm so cold it startled even me, that I would never marry Captain Adrian Wolfe. In my last life, I loved Adrian the way a drowning person loves air. I loved him so much, I handed him my future with both hands. The enlistment slot that should have been mine. The chance to wear the uniform I'd dreamed about since I was a girl. I gave it up without hesitation, because he said one sentence that sounded like a promise. And then he turned around and gave my slot to Serena Lane. His first love, his white moonlight, the woman he had been worshipping long before my name ever mattered to him. I stayed behind, in a house that never truly welcomed me, doing everything I was told was a good woman's duty. I cooked, I cleaned, I bowed my head. I learned the language of patience until it became the only language I spoke. While I managed his parents, his meals, his reputation, his peace, he spent his days tangled in a passion that never included me. As the years dragged on, Adrian's gaze changed. First came indifference, then impatience, then disgust, sharp and obvious as a slap. Letters began arriving, one after another, demanding divorce. Each envelope was thin, but somehow it weighed more than my entire body. I would read them in the dim kitchen light, hands shaking, forcing myself to believe that if I tried harder, he would soften. Then he got hurt, discharged. A proud soldier who refused to sit at a desk, refused to accept a lighter post, refused to be seen as less than glorious. He came home broken. And I, fool that I was, stayed. I learned acupuncture with blistered fingers. I brewed medicinal soups until my clothes carried the smell of herbs instead of myself. I held him up when he couldn't stand. I smiled when he spat bitterness. I swallowed my own tears so he wouldn't feel guilty. When the country surged forward in the late 80s and the winds of reform began to roar, Adrian caught the wave like he was born for it. Business, deals, networks, influence. He rose again, faster than anyone expected. For a moment, I believed my devotion had finally brought me a happy ending. That illusion died in a hospital corridor. I was there to care for my mother-in-law, exhausted and hollow. When I saw my Adrian supporting Serena Lane into the maternity ward with the kind of tenderness I had never once received. His voice was gentle, his hands were careful, his eyes held a warmth I had spent decades begging for. In that instant, I understood. His heart was ice, and I had wasted my entire life trying to melt it with my blood. Even my son, the child I carried for 10 months, the child I raised with everything I had, looked at me one day with disgust, as if my love was a stain. "Mom," he said, lips curling, "you should look in the mirror. What part of you deserves Dad? Aunt Serena and Dad are the ones who belong together. You're the reason they couldn't be together all these years. You and that ridiculous debt between families. You should have let him go." And then the final knife. At Adrian's wedding, I wasn't invited. I wasn't even mentioned. But Serena Lane sat beside him in the seat of honor, smiling under red banners and warm blessings, as if she had earned everything I had bled for. I died with hatred in my throat and shame in my bones. So when I opened my eyes again, and the air smelled like old paper and autumn dust and possibility, I didn't waste a second asking why. I only whispered one sentence to myself, steady as an oath. This time, I live for me. Autumn 1975. Recruitment season. The neighborhood office was exactly as I remembered. Faded posters on the walls. A wooden desk scarred by years of stamps and forms. Outside the window, bright red slogans shouted certainty into the world. A soldier brings glory to the whole family. Dedicate your youth to the army. Defend the motherland without regret. The director stared at me like I'd suddenly grown another head. Claire Harper, she said slowly, have you really thought this through? This is the last enlistment slot, and the unit you're assigned to, that's where your fiancé is serving. Wouldn't it be wonderful for the two of you to strive together after you enlist? Fiancé. The word hit my chest like an old bruise. In my last life, I would have clutched the form tighter, eyes shining, imagining romance wrapped in uniforms and sacrifice. I would have believed we were meant to stand side by side under the same flag. Now, I only felt a quiet, razor-clean clarity. I lifted my gaze to the slogans outside the window and smiled faintly, as if I was looking at a road sign that finally made sense. Director, I said, voice calm. Women hold up half the sky. The director blinked. I continued, steady and firm. The textile industry is a pillar of the national economy. I'm still young, but I can't let myself be consumed by love. I want to dedicate my strength to building socialism. It wasn't a lie. Not anymore. In my last life, my entire existence revolved around Adrian Wolfe, and I still died with nothing. This life, I wanted my hands to build something that could not be taken from me. The director's expression softened, then brightened, as if she was witnessing something inspiring instead of alarming. Excellent, she said, standing and patting my shoulder with sudden enthusiasm. The torch of this new era really has been passed to your generation. With your abilities, you'll become a shining example for working women everywhere. I thanked her, collected my papers, and walked out. The alleyway outside was familiar like a childhood scar. People in blue factory uniforms pedaled large-frame bicycles. Someone laughed near a street stall. The air tasted like iron and steam and dried leaves. For a moment, the vividness of rebirth washed over me so hard I almost stopped walking. I tipped my face toward the golden sunset and let out a small, breathy laugh. How wonderful. Everything was still in time. This life, I would live it brilliantly. In my own way. Then I stepped into the house, and the rich aroma of stewed chicken snapped me straight back to reality. Warm yellow light filled the living room, and there, on the sofa, sat Adrian Wolfe, 45 years younger, exactly as I remembered, down to the sharp line of his jaw and the cold restraint in his eyes. Even in youth, he carried authority like a blade at his hip, thick brows, high nose bridge, a presence that made people straighten their backs without realizing. In my last life, one accidental glance from him could make my heart tremble and my cheeks burn. Now, I simply looked at him and felt distance, like staring at a storm you've already survived. Adrian noticed me watching and frowned slightly. He reached into his coat and handed me a piece of paper, a marriage application form fresh from the political office. He looked like he wanted to say something, but hesitation held him back. His mother, Mrs. Wolfe, sat beside him, posture rigid and expression sharp as a knife that had never been dulled by kindness. She didn't bother with pleasantries. "This marriage should be put on hold," she said, voice cold and final. "Adrian is at a critical stage in his career. Young people shouldn't be burdened by emotional entanglements. At his age, he should devote himself to national defense. Protecting the country is what matters." My father's brows drew together, displeasure flickering through his usual gentleness. "What you said isn't wrong, Mrs. Wolfe," he replied, careful but firm. "But my daughter has also prepared to enlist. Wouldn't it be good for both of them to serve together?" Mrs. Wolfe's eyes narrowed. "The army isn't a place for people to enjoy themselves," she snapped. "If she joins, she'll only distract Adrian. Surely you don't mean to make Claire Harper a stumbling block in the path of his advancement." Are you trying to repay an old debt of gratitude by forcing my son to carry the burden of your daughter's entire life? Her gaze landed on me with open disdain, as if I were an object that had somehow wandered into the room by mistake. In my last life, that look would have crushed me. I would have shrunk, apologized, promised to do better, promised to be worthy, because the truth was always ugly. The engagement existed only because my grandfather once saved Adrian's grandfather in wartime. Without that debt, there would never have been us. Adrian came from generations of soldiers, deeply rooted and respected. And I was, what? An ordinary girl from a textile family. So ordinary it was almost laughable. The marriage application Adrian brought wasn't even his choice. His grandfather had pushed him into it, and everyone knew it. My parents, out of gratitude and fear, had always treated Adrian's preferences like sacred law. They tiptoed around his moods, as if he carried their family's fate in his pocket. A marriage built on imbalance was a slow execution. I didn't move. I didn't flinch. I didn't beg. Adrian's eyes sharpened, as if he was finally about to speak. But I spoke first. I think Mrs. Wolfe is absolutely right, I said calmly. Marriage is serious. It shouldn't be rushed. The room fell silent so fast it felt like the air had been cut. My father stared at me, stunned. Mrs. Wolfe blinked, thrown off by the lack of resistance. Adrian looked at me as if he'd just met a stranger, wearing my face surprise and confusion, tightening the line between his brows. His lips parted slightly, as if to ask why. But I didn't give him the chance. Because this time, I wasn't here to fight for him. This time, I was here to step aside, and to choose the rough, honest, logistic soldier. I hadn't even met yet the man I would push into the military academy. The man who would one day become a division commander. The man who would make everyone finally look at me and realize I was never the one who wasn't worthy. Because of Adrian Wolfe, I had wasted an entire lifetime. So in this life, I would stay far away from Adrian Wolfe. I would live for myself. He didn't even pretend to be polite. The moment we were out of the main room, Adrian reached for my wrist and pulled me into a small side room, shutting the door behind us with a quiet click that sounded far too intimate for a man who claimed he had nothing to hide. His voice dropped, patient, measured, like he was soothing a stubborn recruit instead of speaking to the woman he was supposedly going to marry. Claire, my parents just think we're still young. There's no need to rush into marriage. The district's been busy lately. When it calms down, I'll resubmit the application. He paused, searching my face as if he expected gratitude. And besides, he continued, if we're in the same unit after getting married, it could cause unnecessary problems. As for your enlistment, maybe you should think it over a bit more. I looked at him and smiled faintly. The kind of smile that didn't warm anything. No need to think it over, Adrian. I spoke calmly. I never intended to enlist just to become your comrade in arms. The words landed clean and hard. For a second, he only stared at me, as if my mouth had formed a sentence his ears couldn't accept. Then the corner of his lips tugged up in something that wasn't humour, just pride sharpened into mockery. Claire Harper, he said slowly, voice edged with irony. Since when did you learn this little trick? Acting distant just to hold on tighter. His gaze flicked over me like an inspection, cold and dismissive. Enlistment isn't a game. The army isn't a place for you to play with your emotions. Righteous words, hollow at the core, because I knew him better than anyone in this room. In my previous life, he had used our engagement like a chain around my ankle. He had forced me to give up my enlistment slot with the excuse of our future and what's proper, then handed that slot to Serena Lane as easily as if he were passing a cup of water. And now, in this life, The excuses were already returning, one after another, dressed up in concern. I curled my fingers into my palm so tightly my nails bit skin. Let's be honest. Adrian Wolf didn't want to protect me from the army. He wanted to stop me from taking what Serena wanted. I had already made up my mind. I was about to say it, clearly. Finally. I want to break off the engagement. But before the words could leave my mouth, a loud knock slammed against the door. Then his mother's voice sliced through the hallway like a whip. Adrian, it's getting late. We should go. Didn't you say you'd help Serena fix her radio today? Radio. Of course. We were in my house. My parents had prepared a feast like it was a holiday. And still, he could be summoned away by that woman with one sentence and a soft excuse. Adrian's expression shifted instantly. Not guilt, not shame, just quick calculation. He turned back to me only long enough to throw out a careless promise like crumbs. I'll come find you once I'm done. And then he was gone. In a rush. Not even one glance back. I watched his figure fade down the dim corridor. And I knew I wouldn't see him again tonight. Because as long as Serena Lane existed in his orbit, I would always be the person he forgot. My parents had slaughtered the chicken they'd been saving for New Year's just to welcome him properly. My father had woken early, sweeping the front yard again and again, scrubbing the stones on the steps until they looked almost new. My mother had wiped the square wooden table until her hands went raw, then carefully spread the floral tablecloth she treasured too much to use on ordinary days. The window panes shone from being polished with old newspapers. Even the portrait of the national leader on the wall had been dusted and straightened, as if a man's approval could be earned with enough effort and humility. And after all that, Adrian Wolf still wouldn't stay for dinner. I didn't blame my parents. In my last life, I had trained them to believe his presence was a blessing. I only felt something hollow open in my chest. Serena Lane had been his high school classmate, beautiful, talented, graceful in singing and dancing, a star that belonged on a stage, not in the shadowed corners of someone else's engagement. She was the light in his heart, the one he'd never stopped adoring. And now her family problems had finally been resolved, meaning she was eligible to enlist again. But our district only had one last enlistment slot. Mine. For Serena, Adrian would cross fire and water without blinking. So what was forcing his fiancée to give up a single opportunity compared to that? In my previous life, to secure that slot for Serena, Adrian had even agreed to marry me. And from the moment I put that ring of obligation on my finger, my life had started collapsing in slow motion. This time, I would still give up the slot. Not out of love, but because I wanted to sever every tie between Adrian and me once and for all. Because I wanted to see the truth with my own eyes. If I stepped aside, if I removed the obstacle, would he and Serena really stay together for the rest of their lives? The words I had meant to say never left my mouth. But it didn't matter. In 5 days, Adrian's leave would end. Serena would officially join the Army Art Troupe. Their unit would soon be transferred south. And after that, the sky would be wide, the distance would be merciful. And Adrian Wolf and I would have no connection left to speak of. After dinner, I couldn't bear to stay at home watching my parents' worried faces. So I went for a walk along the riverbank, letting the night air cool the storm of emotion inside me. Without realizing it, my feet carried me closer and closer to the military barracks, where Adrian was stationed. From afar, the barracks lights shimmered through the dark, like a memory refusing to die. The base wasn't far from home, yet he rarely came back. Was it really devotion to the country? Or had he been avoiding me all along? In my last life, every time he was granted a short leave, I started preparing days ahead. I chose my neatest outfit. I braided my glossy hair into 2 tidy plaits. I packed roasted sunflower seeds I'd made myself, along with handmade pastries I hoped he'd like. Each time I caught sight of his familiar silhouette after sleepless nights of longing, my heart raced like I was 17 again, foolish and hopeful. Back then, I deliberately ignored the brief flicker of disdain that crossed his eyes whenever he looked at me, as if my effort embarrassed him. Thinking about it now, I only felt bitter emptiness. And then, as if the heavens had decided to hand me an answer instead of another question, I saw them, a couple walking not far from the barracks. Adrian Wolfe, strolling slowly beside a young woman. She wore a floral dress that hugged her figure perfectly. Long black hair spilled down her back, gleaming so beautifully even the streetlights seemed to soften for her. Their fingers were tightly clasped, their heads tilted toward each other with an intimacy that didn't belong to just friends. Serena Lane, the woman who had inserted herself into my marriage and my previous life, entangling me in misery for half of it. My chance had come. I steadied my breathing, quickened my steps, and stopped directly in front of them. My voice was cold, with a smile that cut instead of comforted. Captain Wolfe, so this is where you fix radios now. On the riverbank. Adrian's face turned pale like he'd been struck. He yanked his hand away from Serena's so quickly it was almost funny, if it hadn't been so familiar. His brows furrowed. Panic flickered in his eyes, quick and ugly. "Claire," he snapped. "Didn't I tell you to wait for me at home? What are you doing here? Were you following me?" I let out a short laugh, sharp enough to sting. "Is this road your private property? If I hadn't decided to take a walk, I wouldn't have discovered why you suddenly withdrew our marriage application." His expression stiffened, his eyes darted away. "You misunderstood." His voice went careful, controlled. "Postponing the marriage is between us. It has nothing to do with Serena." At that moment, Serena tugged gently on his sleeve, delicate as a breeze, innocent as a hymn. Her voice was soft enough to melt butter. "Adrian, don't argue with Miss Harper because of me. I don't want to see you upset." I almost admired it. That perfect performance. That fragile flower act. That sweet voice that made men feel like protectors. It was exactly the same as my last life. And just like last time, my patience didn't survive it. I laughed again. But this time, it was bitter. "What an impressive performance," I said, eyes locked on her. "So you're telling me you didn't know he's engaged, and yet you're here holding his hand and acting pitiful. Do you have any shame at all?" Serena's eyes instantly turned red. She looked up at Adrian, like he was her only shelter. "Adrian," she whispered, trembling. "Did she misunderstand me? I've only ever seen you as a friend." And sure enough, just like my previous life, he moved. Adrian stepped in front of her, shielding her with his body as if I were the attacker and she were the wounded. His voice turned stern, disapproving. "Claire Harper, watch your tone. There's nothing improper between Serena and me. Our relationship is completely innocent." I widened my eyes, raising my voice, letting the irony drip openly. "Innocent. Holding hands is innocent now. Adrian, do you think I'm 3 years old? I'm your fiancé. Is this how you repay the years I've been tied to you?" It was the first time I fought back, and it left him speechless. Around us, a few middle-aged women were already lingering nearby, ears perked, eyes sparkling with the excitement of fresh scandal. They exchanged looks, whispering. I didn't need to hear the words to know what would happen next. By tomorrow, the entire neighborhood would know. Serena clearly understood that too. No woman wanted to be labeled a homewrecker, especially not one trying to enter an army art troupe with a clean reputation. So she changed tactics. She tugged at Adrian's sleeve again, voice soft and apologetic. We're just old classmates. We've always been close, so maybe I rely on him a bit too much sometimes. Tears shimmered in her eyes. It's my fault for making you misunderstand. I let out a cold laugh. Misunderstand? Anyone with eyes can see what's going on. I took one step closer, voice low but clear enough for every listening ear. If you two stood together openly, honestly, maybe I'd respect your love. But this, you want to play the virtuous ones while sneaking around in the dark. Serena's tears spilled, perfect and trembling. Claire Harper, she sobbed. Adrian and I have never done anything wrong to you. How could you say such things about me? My memory flashed like lightning. Her cruel words from my last life, carved deep into bone. You have nothing. Just a poor girl from the countryside. What makes you think you're worthy? People like you, if you died, no one would care. In my last life, I had swallowed it. This time, I refused. Adrian's face darkened. His voice rose, anger burning through his composure. Claire Harper, enough. I withdrew the marriage application because of work. I needed to reconsider the timing. Don't drag Serena into this. There's nothing filthy between us. You're being unreasonable. I stared at him, and in that stare was the clean end of a lifetime. Fine, I said softly, almost gently. Then let's make it simple. My smile returned, calm and terrifying. If there's nothing between you two, you won't mind what I do next. I lifted my chin, voice crisp like a stamped official notice. Tomorrow, I'll go to the neighborhood office and formally cancel the engagement. I want you to apologize to Serena. Right. Now. Adrian's voice came down like a verdict, sharp enough to make the women nearby fall silent for half a breath before their whispering started again. Beside him, Serena dabbed at her tears with the corner of a handkerchief, shoulders trembling with the kind of fragile grace that made men feel heroic. But when she lowered her lashes, I caught it. Just a flicker, a flash of satisfaction hidden deep in her eyes, quick as a spark in ash. In my previous life, it had always been like this. Every argument ended the same way. Adrian standing between us, Serena behind him like a saint painted on glass, and me forced to bow my head and apologize for bleeding. Back then, I would cry and insist she had provoked me first. I would swear she'd said things no decent person could say, but Adrian never believed it. Because in his mind, Serena Lane was gentle, refined, cultured. A woman like her couldn't possibly have venom in her mouth. And there she was now, still playing the same tune, voice trembling softly as she clutched his arm. Adrian, it's my fault, she whispered, like an angel begging mercy for a demon. Please don't be mad at Miss Harper because of me. Kind words on the surface, kerosene underneath. I didn't even look at Adrian again. I walked straight past him, stopped in front of Serena, and pointed a finger right at her face. Shut your mouth, I said, each word crisp and cold. Stop pretending you're some pitiful little angel. You're disgusting. Serena's eyes widened. I leaned in just enough for her to hear me clearly, for everyone else to hear it too. Destroying other people's relationships while playing the victim, you make me sick. In my last life, I had never dared speak to Adrian that way. Never dared tear the mask off Serena in public. But I wasn't that woman anymore. Adrian's temper snapped. Claire Harper, he barked, voice rising so sharply the night seemed to recoil. If you won't apologize, then get out of my sight. I will never marry a rude, vicious woman like you. I laughed. Not soft. Not shy. Not pleading. A bitter laugh that cut through the air like a blade. Don't worry, Captain Wolf, I said, smile cold as river ice. From now on, you'll never have to see me again. Adrian froze. the anger on his face stuttering into something like alarm. "What do you mean?" "Exactly what you've always wanted," I replied calmly. I lifted my chin, voice steady, public, final. Our engagement was arranged when we were children. We never registered a marriage. So as of now, consider it broken. Serena's breath caught. Adrian's eyes flickered. I continued, each sentence a clean cut through old chains. "I won't keep deceiving myself. You don't owe me anything. You don't need to marry me out of gratitude to your grandfather." My gaze slid to Serena, the sweet, trembling act, the red eyes, the saintly sigh. "Stay with her," I said simply. "I'm stepping aside. I wish you both happiness." Then I turned back to Adrian, letting him hear the ending like a bell. "From this moment on, our engagement is over. Whatever happens next, we go our separate ways." I walked away without looking back. In my last life, I had watched Adrian's back disappearing into distance countless times. This life, it was finally my turn to leave first. 2 nights later, deep in the dark between sleep and waking, I heard a faint tapping at my window. Soft, careful, familiar. I already knew who it was. This wasn't the first time. I didn't want to wake the neighbours and give them more to chew on, so I quietly pushed the window open. And there he was, Captain Wolf, climbing over the ledge as if my room belonged to him, stepping silently onto the floorboards. His eyes were deep and still like a silent lake, dark and unwavering, locked tightly onto me. Beneath that stillness, emotions surged like hidden waves. That look again, that same gaze that had deceived me in my previous life again and again until I was lost in him. I dug my nails into my thigh hard enough to hurt, forcing myself awake in every sense. My voice was cold when I spoke. "What are you doing here, Captain Wolf?" He grabbed my wrist with a firm grip, leaning in, voice low and demanding. "I heard from the neighbourhood director that you gave up your enlistment slot. Is that true?" I nodded. "Yes. I didn't give him drama. I didn't give him tears. I don't have ambition for that path," I said evenly. "So I decided not to enlist. I don't want to cause unnecessary trouble for the organisation." I thought he'd be pleased. After all, hadn't he always waited for me to step aside so he could hand everything to Serena? But Adrian's expression darkened instantly, like a storm rolling in. "What are you playing at?" he snapped. "First you give up enlistment. Then you break off our engagement. Don't you think you've taken this joke far enough?" I smiled faintly, mocking without raising my voice. "Isn't this exactly what you wanted?" I met his eyes, not flinching. "You get to give the enlistment slot to Serena Lane, and I step aside so she can take my place as your wife. The golden couple of the regiment. Perfect." Adrian's face froze. He clearly hadn't expected me to say it so plainly, so mercilessly. For a moment, he looked almost caught. He rubbed the tip of his nose awkwardly, searching for words. "What nonsense," he muttered. "I already promised my grandfather. Once this busy period is over, I'll marry you. Before I'm transferred south, I'll even make sure you're pregnant. The position of Mrs. Wolf has always been yours." His tone turned impatient, like he was tired of a childish tantrum. "You don't need to pull stunts like this just to get my attention. People outside are gossiping, and Serena's been upset these past few days. I don't want rumours to hurt her." There it was. Not love, not regret, not even guilt. Just fear that Serena might be inconvenienced. A bitter laugh escaped me. I lowered my head, pretending the sting in my eyes was only exhaustion. Even when a heart has gone cold, some corners still ache. So that was why he came. Not because he cared about me, because he didn't want Serena to suffer. I looked up again, voice soft, almost gentle. "Captain Wolf." He paused. I asked the question I had swallowed for years. The question that had rotted inside me like poison. You never loved me, did you? Adrian froze. Confusion flickered across his face, then his brows knit with impatience, as if I were wasting his time. What difference does it make? He said flatly. Love or not, this marriage was arranged long ago, decided by adults. It was never something I had a choice in. I nodded slowly, as if I'd just received a final confirmation. Then I spoke, calm and steady, like reading the conclusion of a report. Chasing after you has been exhausting. I don't want to do it anymore. The words hung between us like frost. For years, I continued, I convinced myself we would always be together. But looking back now, that was just a lie I told myself. He didn't respond. His lips pressed into a hard line, expression unreadable. I inhaled once, deep and clean. You should go, I said quietly. Don't come looking for me again. Let's each live our own lives in peace. The air froze. Then Adrian let out a low, scornful laugh. The sound of a man who couldn't stand losing control. Fine, he said. Then let's end it here. He leaned closer, eyes cold. Just don't regret what you said tonight. Without another word, he climbed back out the window the same way he came. The window slammed shut with a sharp thud. And this time, his departure didn't shake me. I turned off the desk lamp, lay back down, and closed my eyes. Without that engagement, Adrian Wolfe and I were always meant to be two parallel lines. Never meant to cross. In my previous life, I had never once stepped into his heart. In this life, I certainly wouldn't either. From now on, I would use the advantage of my rebirth for one thing only: to earn money. The era of economic reform was just around the corner. This time, I wouldn't be foolish enough to fall in love again. I would fight for myself. After Adrian's leave ended, he returned to his unit, and I began my new routine. Before dawn each day, I arrived at the textile factory. Rows of massive weaving machines roared like steel beasts, belts turning, needles flashing, air thick with lint and heat. I focused on every movement, every small detail, never letting my mind drift for even a second. During short breaks, I chased down the most experienced workers, asking questions, learning technique, memorizing patterns like they were battle formations. Of course, the neighbours talked. Has that Harper girl lost her mind? She gave up being an officer's wife just to be a factory worker. Her father must be furious. No matter how skilled she gets, she'll still be labour class. How can that compare to being the wife of a regiment commander? They didn't have my memories. They didn't know what was coming. They didn't know that the world was about to change. That planned quotas would loosen. That opportunity would flood in like a tide. That textiles would become an empire. That fashion would explode into colours and cuts and desire. Right now, clothing was plain, repetitive, modest. But soon, textiles wouldn't just meet basic needs. They would become identity, style, function, business. I stayed. I learned. I prepared. Because when the country entered its era of rapid development, I would already be standing at the door, ready to step through. That morning, I left home early, walking along the riverbank bordering the city. The dawn air was sharp. The water moved slowly, dull as metal. Then a loud snorting sound shattered the quiet. I turned just in time to see a massive black pig leap off a military supply truck. Before I could even process it, the beast lowered its head and charged straight at me at full speed. My blood went cold. I turned and ran, heart pounding, but it was relentless, hooves thudding like drums behind me. A young serviceman jumped off the truck, shouting as he chased the runaway pig. Pure chaos. Me running. The pig chasing. The soldier chasing the pig. The ridiculous pursuit stretched along the riverbank until my foot slipped. The world tilted, and with a violent splash, I plunged straight into the icy water. The shock stole my breath. Freezing current soaked through my clothes, biting deep into skin, dragging at my limbs like hands. I thrashed, panic exploding through me. Was I really going to die again? Reborn, just to drown, because of a pig. Dirty river water filled my eyes, my nose, my mouth. I coughed and gasped, lungs burning, hands clawing at slick weeds that gave me nothing. Tears rose, swallowed instantly by the current. Was fate mocking me? Just then, the soldier saw me go under. He didn't hesitate. He dove in. Strong strokes cut through the water. In seconds he reached me, wrapped a firm arm around my waist, and hauled me toward shore with a force that felt like salvation. When we stumbled onto land, I was drenched, shaking, miserable. My soaked clothes clung tightly to me, outlining every curve, in a way that made my face burn hotter than the cold. The soldier immediately shrugged off his own uniform jacket, wrung it out hard, and thrust it toward me with an awkward jerk of his hand, signalling for me to put it on. He scratched the back of his head, eyes flickering away, ears turning red with embarrassment and concern. And when he finally looked at me again, his voice came out rough, honest, breathless from the river. "Are you hurt?" I stared at him through dripping lashes, shivering, the military jacket heavy in my hands. This was the first time in 2 lifetimes that a man had jumped into cold water for me without asking what he could gain. And somewhere in the distance, the runaway pig squealed again, as if laughing at the universe's sense of timing. "Apologize to Serena. Right now." Captain Wolfe said it like an order on a parade ground, like my dignity was something he could stamp and file away. Beside him, Serena Lane wiped at her tears. Her lashes trembled, her mouth quivered, the perfect picture of a wronged woman. But when she lowered her gaze, I saw it again, just for a breath. Satisfaction. A small, secret gleam hiding at the bottom of her eyes. In my last life, this scene had replayed so many times it felt scripted. Every time Adrian and I fought, he stood on her side. Every time he forced me to apologize. I cried. I insisted she provoked me first. I swore she said cruel things when no one was listening. He never believed me, because to him, Serena Lane was gentle, refined, cultured. A woman like her couldn't possibly have a tongue sharp enough to cut skin. And now she clung to his arm again, voice trembling sweetly. "Adrian, it's my fault," she murmured. "Please don't be mad at Miss Harper because of me." Forgiveness on the surface, gasoline underneath. I didn't answer him. I didn't even look at him. I walked past Captain Wolfe like he was a lamppost in my way and stopped right in front of Serena, close enough to see the careful shine of her tears, close enough to see the little victory she was tasting. I raised my hand and pointed straight at her face. "Shut your mouth," I said, voice cold and clean. "Stop pretending you're some pitiful angel. You're disgusting." Serena's breath hitched. I continued, each word like a nail driven in. "Destroying other people's relationships while playing the victim. You make me sick." For the first time in 2 lifetimes, I spoke without fear. Captain Wolfe exploded. "Claire Harper!" he barked, voice ringing out so sharply the women nearby all leaned in, delighted by the show. "If you won't apologize, then get out of my sight. I will never marry a rude, vicious woman like you." I laughed. Not from humor. From relief. "Don't worry, Captain," I said, lips curling. "From now on, you'll never have to see me again." He froze. The anger on his face cracked, and something like alarm flashed in his eyes. "What do you mean?" "Exactly what you've wanted all along," I replied calmly. "Our engagement was arranged when we were children. We never registered a marriage, so consider it broken, officially." Serena's fingers tightened on his sleeve. Captain Wolf's voice dropped. "Dangerous." "You're being dramatic." "No." I shook my head once. Firm. "I'm being awake." I looked at Serena and spoke like I was cutting the final thread. "Stay with her. You don't need to marry me out of some old debt. I'm stepping aside. I wish you both happiness." Then I turned and walked away without looking back. In my last life, I had watched his back leaving me countless times. This time, it was finally my turn to leave first. 2 nights later, when the house was quiet and the street outside was swallowed in darkness, faint tapping came at my window. Soft, familiar, careful. I already knew. I didn't want the neighbours to hear and add more gossip to their morning tea. So I pushed the window open silently. Captain Wolf climbed in like he owned the night. His eyes locked onto me, deep and still, like a lake under moonlight. Beneath that stillness, I could almost feel the surge of unspoken emotions, like waves hidden under calm water. That look again. The look that had deceived me for an entire lifetime. I dug my nails into my thigh, hard, grounding myself in pain so my heart wouldn't betray me. My voice stayed cold. "What are you doing here, Captain Wolf?" He grabbed my wrist. Firm, possessive, like he was trying to reattach something that had slipped his control. "I heard you gave up your enlistment slot." His voice was low. "Is it true?" I nodded. "Yes." I answered the way I would answer an official inquiry. I decided not to enlist. I don't want to cause unnecessary trouble for the organisation. For a second, I expected him to relax, to look pleased, because that was what he wanted, wasn't it? My slot, my sacrifice, a clean path for Serena. Instead, his face darkened. "What are you playing at?" he snapped. "First you give up enlistment, then you break off our engagement. Don't you think this joke has gone far enough?" I smiled faintly. "It isn't a joke." I met his eyes, unblinking. "It's your wish coming true." His jaw tightened. I kept going, making it plain, making it ugly. "You give the slot to Serena Lane. I step aside and let her take my place as your wife, the golden couple of the regiment. You soar upward together, hand in hand, and I disappear. Isn't that exactly what you wanted?" Captain Wolf stared at me like I'd slapped him. He rubbed the bridge of his nose. Awkward, irritated, cornered. "What nonsense," he said, forcing his tone into authority. "I promised my grandfather, once this busy period is over, I'll marry you. Before I'm transferred south, I'll make sure you're pregnant. The position of Mrs. Wolf has always been yours." Then his true reason came out. As casual as breath. "People are already gossiping. Serena's been very upset these past few days. I don't want those rumours to hurt her." There it was. Not love, not regret, not even guilt. Only concern that Serena might be uncomfortable. Something inside me went quiet. A bitter laugh escaped me. I lowered my head to hide the sting gathering in my eyes, because even a heart that has turned to ice still remembers where it used to bleed. So he came for her, not for me. I looked up and asked softly, the question that had rotted inside my chest for years. "You never loved me, did you?" He froze, then frowned as if I were asking something childish. "What difference does it make?" he said bluntly. "Love or not, this marriage was arranged. Decided long ago. It was never my choice." I nodded slowly. Then I spoke. Calm and steady, like signing my own release papers. Chasing you has been exhausting. I don't want to do it anymore. Silence fell heavy between us. He pressed his lips together, eyes unreadable. I took a breath. You should go, I said quietly. Don't come looking for me again. Let's each live our own life in peace. For a moment he didn't move. Then he let out a low, scornful laugh. The sound of a man whose pride couldn't stand being refused. Fine, he said. Then let's end it here. Just don't regret what you said tonight. He climbed back out the window the same way he came. The window slammed shut. And this time, his departure didn't shake me. I turned off the lamp, closed my eyes, fell asleep as if he'd never been there. Because without that engagement, Captain Wolf and I were always meant to be two parallel lines, never meant to cross. From then on, I used my second life the way it was meant to be used. Not for love, for money, for freedom. I threw myself into the textile factory. Before dawn, I arrived. I learned the machines like learning a language. I memorized every sound they made, every small vibration, every sign of trouble. During breaks, I hunted down the most experienced workers, asked questions, watched their hands, stole their techniques with my eyes. The neighborhood gossiped, of course. She gave up being an officer's wife just to be a factory worker. She's lost her mind. They didn't have my memories. They didn't know what the coming years would bring. They didn't know that textiles would become an empire, that style and demand would explode, that opportunity would roar in like a flood. I kept my head down and prepared. And then fate, as if it couldn't stand my life becoming too orderly, threw a pig at me. That morning, walking along the riverbank in the grey early light, a loud snorting shattered the calm. A massive black pig leapt off a military supply truck like a cannonball and charged straight at me. I ran. The pig chased. A young serviceman jumped off the truck, shouting as he chased the pig. Chaos ripped down the river path. My foot slipped. The world tilted. I plunged into the icy river with a splash that stole my breath. Cold water punched into my lungs. My clothes dragged me down. Dirty water filled my eyes and mouth. I thrashed, clawing at slippery weeds. Was I really going to die again? Reborn, only to drown because of a runaway pig. Then an arm hooked around my waist. Strong, firm, certain. The soldier dove in without hesitation, cut through the current, and hauled me toward the shore. When we stumbled onto land, I was drenched and shaking. My soaked clothes clung to my body, humiliating and cold. The soldier immediately stripped off his uniform jacket, wrung it out, and held it out to me, eyes flicking away in awkward embarrassment. "Comrade, I'm so sorry," he said, sheepish. "That pig didn't know any better. It must have scared you half to death." I didn't answer, because in that moment, I finally saw his face clearly, and my entire body froze. A complicated rush of emotion hit me all at once. 45 years ago, in my previous life, I had met him once before. It was right after I married Captain Wolf, right after the first divorce letter arrived. Desperate and humiliated, I had packed a few clothes and ridden 3 different buses, 3 days and 2 nights. Thousands of kilometers, all the way to the southern base. Captain Wolf refused to see me. He sent a slip of paper through someone else's hands. Life has become too suffocating. We don't share the same ideals. Let's divorce and find peace. I wandered outside the camp hungry, cold, exhausted, and collapsed near the fence. And this man had passed by. A young, honest-looking logistics soldier. He gave me 2 steamed buns, helped me find a small inn that didn't require a letter of introduction, so I could rest. Years later, I learned his name, Aaron Blake, a cook, a quartermaster, intelligent and hard-working, but from a poor family, with only a middle school education before he enlisted. In my last life, he was a brief kindness in an ocean of cruelty. In this life, he stood in front of me again, dripping river water, holding out his jacket like a shield. I swallowed hard, lips trembling from cold. Something warm, strange, and tender stirred inside my chest. Was this destiny? Or was this my second chance finally giving me the kind of person I should have chosen from the beginning? I took the jacket slowly, then lifted my eyes, pretending to pout in mock frustration. "What kind of pig wrangling is that?" I said, voice sharp with teasing. "Letting it run wild and nearly kill me. You can't just let this go." Aaron rubbed the back of his neck, flustered and guilty. "It's my fault," he said quickly. "I'll make sure that pig learns discipline. I'm really sorry you had to go through that." I narrowed my eyes, then leaned in with deliberate mischief, letting my next words drop like a trap. "And what about the fact you saw my body?" I asked softly. "How are you planning to make up for that?" His face went crimson in an instant. He dropped his gaze, gripping the hem of his uniform like it could anchor him to the ground. I didn't mean to," he stammered. "Whatever you say, I'll do it." I fought back a grin, kept my expression serious. "A girl's reputation is everything," I said, voice innocent, as if I wasn't enjoying this at all. "If people find out, all those gossiping aunties will say I've lost my virtue. How could I ever show my face again?" Aaron looked like he might faint from panic. "Please don't listen to gossip," he blurted, completely flustered. Then, voice rough with sincerity, he added, I'll take responsibility." And in that moment, with the river wind cold on my skin and his jacket warm on my shoulders, I felt it, not the dizzy fever of obsession I once called love. Something steadier, something safe, something that didn't ask me to shrink so someone else could shine. There was no arrogance in Aaron's tone, no performance, no attempt to impress, only honesty, and the kind of resolve that didn't need to raise its voice to be heard. My parents didn't answer immediately, but I saw it happen right in front of me. The frost in their eyes began to soften, slow and reluctant, like ice surrendering to spring. My mother turned aside with a sharp huff, refusing to look at him, but she didn't argue again. My father tapped his pipe against the floor twice, then let out a long, heavy sigh that sounded like a gate finally unlocking. That was their blessing. Not loud, not dramatic, but real. Not long after, the unit approved our marriage request. There was no grand wedding, no white dress, no lavish banquet to prove we were worthy of happiness. We held a simple ceremony in a small hall at Aaron's unit. His comrades cut red paper into the character for double happiness and pasted it on the walls. Someone brought sunflower seeds. Someone else found 2 thermoses of hot tea. The whole room smelled faintly of ink, warmth, and sincerity. Aaron stood tall in his neatly pressed uniform. I wore a modest red dress. We faced our friends and comrades side by side. And when our eyes met, there was no trembling uncertainty, only quiet certainty, and the thin, bright thread of hope. And just like that, we stepped into marriage, not bound by luxury, not held together by rank, just 2 people choosing each other in a world that was changing faster than anyone dared to admit. Soon after the wedding, Aaron's unit was transferred south, and I followed him to Shen City. Most army wives arrived with their hands already tied to a stove and a cradle. I arrived with a plan. In my previous life, I'd come to Shen City several times. Back then, it had already become a blazing metropolis, famous across the world, a place where the streets glittered and the money moved like water. But now, 45 years earlier, it was still waking up. a small fishing village wearing the first rough outlines of its future. Aaron worried I would suffer there. He thought the wind would be too salty, the living conditions too hard, the roads too poor, the days too plain. I wasn't concerned. I knew what was coming. I knew that once the 1,980 seconds arrived, this place would become the engine of the nation's economy, a symbol of explosive growth, a city that would swallow opportunity whole and spit out legends. Shen City was the future, and I intended to take it with both hands. Inside the military housing complex, the other wives quickly learned my name. Not because I was gentle, not because I was submissive, because I made decisions like a person who already knew where the road ended. At night, when the courtyard went quiet and the lights softened, I often talked with Aaron about the future, just as I expected. He wasn't content to spend his whole life in a kitchen surrounded by smoke and grease. One evening, I looked at him seriously and asked, "Aaron, are you really going to spend your whole life cooking in a canteen?" He hesitated, embarrassed. "Emma, working in the kitchen isn't bad, and getting into a military academy isn't easy." I met his gaze. Voice firm, but not cruel. "Of course it isn't easy," I said. "But if you never try, how will you ever know? Everyone with ambition is climbing. Do you really want to spend your life breathing smoke and grease, watching other men lead in the field when you have the ability to stand there too?" I didn't flatter him. I didn't shame him. I simply told him the truth I could already see. Under my constant encouragement and my quiet pressure that never let him hide behind comfort, Aaron finally picked up his books again. Night after night, after his shifts, he studied until his eyes were red and his fingers smelled like paper and ink. He fell asleep over his notes, woke up, washed his face, and kept going. Months later, he passed the entrance exams, accepted into the National Military Academy. When Aaron left for school, I gave birth to our first daughter. From that moment, the household burden fell entirely on my shoulders. But unlike my past life, I wasn't weary. I wasn't bitter. Because when love is built on respect, it becomes strength, not a chain. The 1,980 seconds arrived like thunder. Opportunity and hardship tangled together, twisting the world into something new. I refused to fall behind. In our tiny one-bedroom apartment, I rocked my baby to sleep while sketching business ideas late into the night. My only real asset was an old sewing machine I'd hunted down after weeks of searching the second-hand market. That machine became my lifeline, my weapon. By day, I carried my daughter on my back and roamed the streets looking for cheap fabric. By night, I bent over the sewing table under a weak lamp, cutting, measuring, stitching, until my shoulders ached and my fingertips felt like they belonged to someone else. Every thread was a step forward. Every stitch was a vow. I read fashion magazines that arrived through the port, studying silhouettes, collars, cuffs, the way a garment could change the shape of a person's confidence. I experimented, failed, unpicked seams, learned again. When I hit technical walls, I sought out veteran tailors, humble and relentless, asking questions until they stopped seeing me as an army wife and started seeing me as someone dangerous. At first, my clothes sold only within the military housing area and on small street stalls nearby. The market was limited. The pace was slow. I didn't let it discourage me. I improved the stitching, upgraded the fabric, adjusted the designs to match what people actually wanted, not what I wished they wanted. Gradually, customers began to return. Then they began to praise. Then they began to order. When the orders stacked too high, I rented a small workshop, hired a few workers, expanded production. My business began to bloom. For the first time, my career truly took off. And while I built with thread and grit, Aaron rose like a rocket, lit from within. He graduated with distinction. From then on, he proved himself again and again in the field. He volunteered for the hardest missions, never shrinking from pressure, calm when chaos hit, decisive in command. Under his leadership, his unit became known for strict discipline, outstanding training, and a string of achievements in exercises and real operations. His rank kept climbing, until one day, he stepped into the senior command ranks. Stars shining on his shoulders. Years later, at a military event, I ran into Serena Lane again, the same woman who once wielded charm like a weapon. Now she was almost invisible. She glanced at me once, then quickly looked away, as if my face alone could remind her of everything she'd lost. A few wives nearby whispered the story to me, eager, pitying, excited all at once. Captain Wolfe had been injured during a mission, a severe leg wound. He received a disability pension and was discharged, went back home to take a minor government job. Serena looked down on him, said he was no longer worthy, divorced him without hesitation. Then she attached herself to a senior officer, a married man. His wife was pushed aside. For a while, Serena flaunted her new status. Arrogant, untouchable, treating everyone in the arts troupe like dust. But vanity makes enemies quickly. She offended too many people. Little by little, she was isolated. Then, for reasons no one fully understood, that engagement fell apart. The officer married another woman. Serena was left abandoned and disgraced. Without love, without protection, she lost influence and standing. In the troupe, she became an afterthought. As for Captain Wolfe, after leaving the army, his administrative job didn't last. He made a serious mistake that caused major financial loss. He was dismissed, blow after blow. The golden boy who had never tasted defeat fell apart. He disappeared from everyone's lives. The woman telling me this sighed with sympathy. I felt nothing. No pity. No sorrow. Everything they suffered was the consequence of their own choices. If anything, part of me thought it still wasn't enough. Time passed. By the dawn of the 21st century, after decades of relentless effort, I had built a textile empire from the ground up. From a cramped workshop to one of the country's leading companies, our products thrived domestically and moved into international markets, winning with quality and innovation. I used the foresight my rebirth gave me and the sharp instincts I forged in the heat of reform. I seized every opportunity, every gap in knowledge, every window of access. Slowly, steadily, I accumulated immense wealth. I became one of the richest women in the nation, a billionaire entrepreneur, a name people spoke with respect. And Aaron was in his 60s, but he carried the same upright strength and quiet authority that had first drawn me to him. Time didn't weaken him, it deepened him. In his perfectly pressed uniform, the stars on his shoulders radiated dignity. Yet when his eyes met mine, that authority always softened into warmth. Through seasons and storms, our bond only grew stronger. We faced the world side by side, hands clasped, hearts steady. Our devoted daughter, our sweet granddaughter. A life full, peaceful, complete. Something I had never dared to dream of in my previous lifetime. Until one day, Aaron and I were driving our granddaughter to the park. As we approached the parking lot, an old man limped out from the guard booth. His hands trembled as he held up a board with a QR code, signaling for us to scan and pay the fee. The moment our eyes met, time seemed to freeze. It was Captain Wolfe. Aaron, of course, had long forgotten the buried stories of my youth. He had no idea the frail, unkempt man before us, clothes hanging off a thin frame, face carved with defeat, had once been the proud regimental commander who believed himself untouchable. Without a flicker of recognition, Aaron calmly scanned the code. The gate lifted. Our car rolled forward and merged into traffic. Inside the car, our granddaughter's cheerful chatter filled the space. Aaron's gentle laughter followed, patient and tender as he answered her innocent questions one by one. In the rearview mirror, I caught one last glimpse of Captain Wolfe. He stood rooted to the spot, motionless, eyes vacant as he watched our car disappear. And in that moment, I understood. This truly was the last time our paths would ever cross. In this lifetime, I was no longer the one who chased someone who didn't deserve me. I was the one who walked away first, and I never looked back. Do you dare walk away from a love that no longer deserves you? Share your thoughts with Endless Stories.